Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're all about the positive vibes here on the show. And with me today, I've got a very special guest. He is the son of the legendary wrestling promoter Verne Gagne, former AWA International Television Champion, former World Tag Team Champion. He has trained a lot of people in the professional wrestling industry in addition to being a wrestler himself. Pleased to welcome the one, the only, Greg Gagne. Greg, welcome to Wrestling with Heart.
Man, Stanley, thank you for that great intro.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Well, it's good to be on with you, and thank you for having me on.
Yes. So now you're from Minneapolis, growing up in wrestling royalty, I guess I should say. You know, you're the son of Verne Gagne. What can you tell me about your first exposure to professional wrestling?
Oh, my first exposure when I was probably 3 years old, 2 years old, 2.5. My father started in Minneapolis. He wrestled at the University of Minnesota. Was on the 1948 Olympic wrestling team. And a national champion, NCAA champion 3 times, Big Ten champion 4 times. And so he started his professional career in Minneapolis. And he was wrestling a guy by the name of Abe King Kong Cashy in the Minneapolis Auditorium. And he had his buddies, Bud Grant, former Viking football coach, was a teammate of his at Minnesota, and Jim Milosky and Billy By and Harvey Solon were all sitting in the front row, and Verne is hammering away, and Cash is choking him on the ropes, and the 4 of them jumped up, and Cashy leaned over and he said, "Sit down, punks." They all sat down. But Verne won the match by disqualification, and the promoters felt he was too small.
Really?
So they sent us to, my dad had a trailer, my mom and father and I traveled to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he wrestled for the junior heavyweight championship, the NWA, and he won that his first week there. And we lived in that trailer, and I can still remember vividly, he would go out and wrestle, he'd come back home, and then across from where the trailer was parked was a movie theater. We couldn't hear it, but he put me up on his shoulders, and we'd watch that damn movie until I was ready to go back to bed. And so then we traveled around through Oklahoma, Louisiana, Texas, and it was a great experience traveling with them. And, and we played a few games in the car. He made up these games that we'd play. And, so that was my first exposure to it. And then we moved back to Minneapolis. He came back here, and he started out on the Chicago DuPont network in 1950. That's when wrestling got on network TV, and he became the biggest star on there. Lou Thez was the world champion. He came in once in a while, but Verne, Pat O'Connor, Killer Kowalski, Yukon Eric, Hardboiled Haggerty, Dick the Bruiser, Wilbur Snyder, Angelo Poffo, that whole crew really started network TV in 1950. And Verne was the first athlete besides Babe Ruth to make over $100,000 in 1950.
It's amazing, to see the evolution of wrestling and wrestling on television, because WWE, as we know it today, is a powerhouse. Yeah. And back in the 50s, wrestling, it was just like it is now, obviously, but back then it was like the hottest thing in town, hottest ticket in town.
Yeah, it was funny because, this is way before your time, and back in the 50s, not every household had a TV. So on Friday or Saturday nights, I forget what night, wrestling came on in the streets in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, all over the country. People would be in the department stores outside the windows. They had the TVs there, and they'd have wrestling on, and people be gathered outside. And he used to tell the story the first time. What they did is off the network TV, the territory promoters would grab a couple people off that for their main event. So this particular time, Verne and Pat O'Connor were going to Buffalo, New York as a tag team. This is like 1951 or early or mid 1950, I guess. And the plane's laid out of Chicago. They get into Buffalo. It's snowing and the traffic is all backed up. And Pat O'Connor turns to Verne. He says, "Man, this is going to kill our gate tonight." And he said, "Well, it sure will." And when they finally made it to the arena, they turned away 25,000 people that night. It was for wrestling. And, so Verne and Pat did Buffalo, and then maybe Lou Thez and Killer Kowalski would go to Boston, and Dick the Bruiser and Angelo Poffo would go to St. Louis. So it was, so that's the way the territories ran then, but they picked the people off the network TV to fulfill their main event. And it drew like crazy. And,
Yeah.
and then in 1957, 58, Verne decided he bought into the Minneapolis wrestling. He wanted to come back and be at home. And they only had one TV network at that time, or where they were running was in Minneapolis. And Verne expanded the television. That's what he did, from Winnipeg to St. Louis, all the way to the West Coast. And we were the biggest territory, bigger than New York. New York had the bigger cities, but we had the bigger territory, from Winnipeg to, well, across Canada eventually. So, that was his forte. He was good at negotiating, and had a great, I mean, the talent all wanted to come to the AWA because he paid so well.
Yeah.
And, we only ran with 16 or 18 top guys, but from the top of the card to the bottom, everybody was a main event.
Everybody from Ric Flair to the Road Warriors, they all cut their teeth in Minneapolis.
I knew Rick in high school, and then we went to University of Minnesota together, and that's where I ran into Jim Brunzell. So the three of us, and then Ken Patera. Ken, my dad sponsored him for the 1972 Olympics, and then after the Olympics, he was a weightlifter, going to turn pro wrestling. And then Khosrow Vasiri was in the Olympics, and my dad, a good friend of his, was helping him, wanted to get him in the United States, and he wanted to be a pro wrestler. So we had Khosrow, Ric Flair, Ken Patera, Jim Brunzell, myself, and Bob Bruggers. And Bob was coming out of pro football. He was a lot older than us. He was late 20s, early 30s. So it was harder for him to really adapt to the sport. He was finally catching on when he was in the Charlotte area. They had that big plane crash, and he was in it, and kind of ended his career.
That's tragic. I mean,
But Verne had this old barn, and he trained over the years 144 wrestlers. Blackjack Lanza, Blackjack Mulligan, Gene Oley and Lars Anderson, Ricky Steamboat, Paul Ellering. God, I mean, the list goes on and on. Sergeant Slaughter. But everybody that came out of his camp, only 2% of the 144 didn't make it to the main event.
What was it to you that made you go, I want to do wrestling. I want to pursue a career in this?
Well, from the time I was a little kid, my dad always wrestled with me. Did amateur in the house, move the furniture, and down we'd go. And I wanted to be a pro football player. And I could throw the ball pretty good quarterback, but it didn't work out for me. I went to Minnesota for a year. They moved me to defense. That was the philosophy of the coach at that time. All the best athletes on defense, and big guys in the Big Ten. And Wyoming had recruited me, so I went out there and I played quarterback out there, and came home for we had winter ball, so we had a break before to go home, and then when we came back, we had to start in the field house working out for getting ready for spring ball. So I get home, and my dad says, "Come on, let's go." Downstairs, moves the furniture around, and I'm 21 years old, 22 years old, And he kept me down and kept me down. Every time I'd get up, I'd go back down. And I got a little mad, so I caught him with an elbow in the nose. And
Oof.
with that, he squeezed my ribs pretty good and actually cracked a rib. So now I got to go back to Wyoming, and I come in there, and the coach say, "What's wrong with you?" I said, "Well, I banged up my ribs." "Well, how did you do that?" And I said, "No, we got this thing. My dad always, moves the furniture, and we go through this thing." And I told them the story, and of course they were laughing, thought it was funnier than hell. But I made it through. And then I came to my dad one day, and I said, he had this camp coming up with Patera, and I'd been at the Olympics with Patera in Germany. And I said, "God, I really want to wrestle." He said, "What makes you think you can wrestle?" And I said, "Well, I've been wrestling with you my whole life." I mean, my God. "Well, you're a little thin, a little light, but we'll take you out to the camp." So I called Brunzell. He was playing semi-pro football, and I said, "Hey, would you like to go to, try wrestling?" "Oh, I don't know how to wrestle." I said, "Well, you're going to learn." I said, you have a chance to do better than what you're doing in semi-pro football." And then Flair was kind of recruited by Patera, and then Rick called me, and I said, "Yeah, yeah, Verne wants you in there in Cosro Vasiri." And we did 6 hours a day, 6 days a week in an old barn with no windows. And we started the end of September. We ran until April 1st. And we were out in that barn. Some nights it was be 15, 20 below zero.
Goodness.
Yeah, in
That's
6 hours nonstop. We started with 1,000 free squats, then up in the ring and learn holds and counter holds. And, as it went on and we got better, he had this drill where he put one guy in the middle of the ring and the other five on the outside. Then one guy would get in, and he would say, "Lock up, grab a headlock, take over, kick out, two arm drags, two tackles, boom, 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 boom." So the guy in the middle, he had to go through all five guys. So he was out there for 20, 22 minutes nonstop. Well, in the wintertime, we got these sweatsuits on. You get the end of the line and you're sweating like crazy. By the time you get to the front, your sweatsuit is froze onto you. And you'd call body slam as soon as you'd go in there. And oh my God, you felt like that cartoon character and just,
yeah, yeah.
shattered.
It's very intense. I mean, that schedule is just
Oh, it was the most
hectic.
intense camp anywhere in the country, and everybody knew that. Eddie Graham had a great camp in Florida. Stu Hart up in Calgary.
Hmm.
Um, the Joe Blanchard and the Funks had a good one down in Texas. Fritz von Erich, he didn't train a whole lot of different people, but the ones he did train were all very good. And that's where over 90% of the wrestlers came out of those camps. I mean, out of New York, Vince McMahon, they never trained anybody. They just fed off of all the talent that these guys had. And then Verne would send, some of the rookies. You might go to Florida for Eddie Graham or to Charlotte, North Carolina for the Crockett's, or you might go down to Texas and you'd be down there for, a year or two, then he'd bring you back. But a lot of them, like Steamboat and Flair, they fell in love with the Charlotte area and never came back.
Now, what was the number one piece of advice that you got from your dad that still sticks with you today?
Well, he said before when I told him I want to go into wrestling, he said, "Well, what makes you think you can do it? You're too small, and you're going to get compared to me, and it's going to be hard on you." And the best advice he ever gave me says, "Here's what you have to do. Be yourself. Don't try to be anybody that you're not." And he told everybody in the camp that, there's a real personality inside of you, and that's what you have to let out. And don't listen to people when they tell you you're too small, you can't do this, you can't do that. He said, when you're done with this camp, you're going to be as good a wrestler as anybody in the country. So don't be, you don't have to be. In fact, the day we finished, he looked at each one of us. He said, when you go to these other areas, they're going to test you. And I'm going to tell you guys right now, you don't have to be afraid of anybody because you can handle anybody in this sport. And we all found out that was true. We
And
went
you
in, they sent Jim and I to Atlanta we were supposed to wrestle Cowboy Bob Orton and Dick Slater for their tag team title. And first night we get to Columbus, Ohio, or Columbus, Georgia. And it's, God, what was his name? A real tough old guy. And yeah, he's in the locker room. Brute Bernard, him and his manager. So I went over and I introduced myself to him, and he said, your father's a something sucker. You can fill in the blank. And I said, well, I'm sure he thinks the same thing about you. And I said, now, are you and I going to have a problem? And he got up and walked in the other locker room. So I grabbed Jim. I said, come on, let's follow. We walked in. He's sitting there. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm sitting right down next to you. I want to know, you and I have a problem. Because we can settle it right here in the locker room. He says, no, I don't have a problem. But they respected anybody that came out of Verne's camp. They were actually a little leery of you because we could all handle ourselves. I mean, our last hour of wrestling was an hour of submission wrestling, submission holds. I mean, we knew how to take care of ourselves. We could take any big man down, take them off their feet. And I remember one night we had the Road Warriors, and I had big Laurinaitis down, Animal, in the figure 4 leg lock. And he's screaming at me, I'm going to kill you. And I said, well, you're not going to get up. And I put that, his legs were so big and it was so tight. I didn't have to put much pressure on. I could have snapped him. And he sat up and I slapped him as hard as I could. I said, you're not getting up. I'll break your freaking legs, you know.
Yeah.
But, so after that, you could have we had pretty good matches with them because they respected us and we respected them and their power.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to
Got to do what you have to do.
do what you have to do to get to where you need to go. And so you made it through, you survived the camps, you get to, you make your debut and you start wrestling. Tell me about some of your favorite opponents that you got to work with.
Oh my God. I mean, I'll tell you, one match that always sticks out in my mind, and I always tell people about it. And Jim and I were wrestling, and they called it a cold match. We were really established in Denver, Colorado, and we were tag team champions, and we were defending against Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson. And Pat had been out for a while and came back for this match. And they call it a cold match because there was no TV on Patterson and Stevens at the time. But the place was still sold out, and they had Bobby Heenan in the corner. And Patterson and Stevens had us in a top wrist lock, arm up over here. And every time we tried to get out of it, they'd either pull us down by our hair or by our tights, or Heenan would distract the referee so he didn't see it. In 8 minutes, we had a full-fledged riot. There was never a punch or kick thrown, just a hair pull or a pull of the tights, and people were coming in the ring to help us. That's when you've really achieved what needs to be achieved in wrestling. And Verne used to say, don't try to be me, and don't try to, people say, you're following in your father's footsteps. Create your own footsteps, your own identity. And that's, Jim and I had that identity as a high-flying team that was, we were pretty darn good.
Yeah, I mean, multiple time tag team champion. I mean, it's got to feel good holding those titles.
Well, especially in the AWA, because you had Nick Bockwinkel, Ray Stevens. They held the tag team titles before Nick became world champion for 3 years. And that was unheard of in that era. And then you had, you had the Road Warriors and, just Jerry Blackwell and Ken Patera. That Blackwell, everybody looked at him, big, heavy guy, 400 pounds. That son of a gun could move in the ring like no big man had ever been in with. Phenomenal. But the talent from top to, Bobby Duncombe and Jack Lanza, Jesse Ventura and Adrian Adonis. I mean, people, God, they couldn't wait till we got in the ring with them. And drew big, big gates all over the place, but we had really great matches with all those teams.
Yeah, and like I said before, so many great names came out of Minneapolis in later years too. I mean, Brock Lesnar,
Yeah.
X-Pac, I believe Molly Holly was from that area as
Mhm.
well. So, I
Yep.
mean, it's incredible to see the wealth of talent from Minneapolis. That's such a hotbed of professional wrestling. I mean,
Well, our AWA TV show was the highest rated wrestling program across the country.
yeah.
We had ratings. We had a 24 rating and a 64 share of the audience in Minneapolis. That means, 64% of the TVs that are turned on are watching.
Hmm.
And we were from there all the way to the West Coast. Those were the kind of ratings we had. And the only show that beat us nationally was 60 Minutes. They had the same rating at 24.
Hmm.
They had 65% share of the audience. We had 64.
It was really
We
neck and
were
neck with
on,
each other.
yeah, we were on, in Denver, I don't know, Sunday mornings at 11 o'clock, Minneapolis, Sunday mornings at 11, Saturday night at 6. So we had good time slots, Milwaukee, Chicago, San Francisco, Salt Lake City, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Winnipeg. And then they filmed the matches in Winnipeg at the arena, played them across Canada on TSN. And that was the highest rated wrestling program they had at that time. And that was from, British Columbia all the way to Montreal.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild the success of Minneapolis wrestling and Minnesota wrestling. And
Yeah, it was every promoter was wanted to be like that. The Crockett's even came in and sat with Verne and us for a whole day watching how we did our TV, how the booking went in the office, and they took that same formula back to Charlotte. And once they put that TV format in all their markets, boom, it exploded like that. And they had a lot of fantastic talent there too, with
hmm.
Burnett and Flair there, and Patera was there. You had Magnum TA, you had Dusty Rhodes. I mean, they had a heck of a crew down there. And, from top to bottom, I would say Charlotte and the AWA were the two territories that from the bottom card to the top were all main events.
Now, you decided I want to run a wrestling school. What made you decide to become a trainer?
Hmm. I had people calling me, you know, I didn't want to do it. The last ones I trained was Tiffany Stratton. And Ken Anderson had a camp up in outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. And so I asked if I could use that, but I needed a couple others. I have two other young guys that I've trained that I can't get them booked anywhere. It's unfortunate because they were really good. Um, she had quite an attitude. Her parents, a friend of mine, had called me and wanted to know if I would train them. And I said, God almighty, I really don't want to. But he was a good friend, so I took her up there. And what you see on TV with her, her attitude, that's really her. There's two or three times I threw her out of the camp.
Really?
Oh yeah, she came in one day and I had the other two guys in there and we've been busting our butts. They did all their squats and everything. They're all warmed up, ready to go. And she said, I'm just too tired. I said, then get out, go home. Well, no, I want to watch. I said, you're not going to watch. I'm done with you. You know, I'm not being paid to do this. I'm doing it as a favor to your parents and a friend of mine. And if you can't do what these guys are doing, you're not going to make it in wrestling. So get out. 10 minutes later, she came back, apologized, and got through the workout. But she did that about three times to me. But she was a great athlete, gymnastics champion. She got tired of doing that. She turned to weightlifting. Her first year, she set a record, a weightlifting record for a press over her head. And then she turned into bodybuilding. And within a year, she won a bodybuilding contest. So all around, she's a great athlete. And I look for her to be a big, huge star for the WWE.
Yeah, I mean, to see the meteoric rise of someone like Tiffany Stratton is just amazing to see, and you had a
Yeah.
hand in doing that. So, kudos to you, for still being able to find talent, train them, get them to where they need to be, because the industry, that's what they need. They need people, more people to make it, to that
Yeah.
level. So
Yeah.
if we keep,
I'm pretty much done with the training now. I've had 5 back surgeries, but I get up and it's hard because you really have to demonstrate for them. And what I usually do is take a couple of kids that I've trained and I talk everybody through it, and then they demonstrate for me. And until they do it right, we do it over and over and over till they get it right. And I just go to I train those kids the same way Verne trained 144. And I learned that, what it takes to become a star. I mean, there's other places out there where people go and train, but you don't see them hit that main event stature, if they're even lucky to, for maybe 8 or 10 years.
I want to touch on some of the stuff you've done outside of the ring. I know you've done a lot of charity work and have helped out with different events or fundraisers, benefits. What kinds of things can you tell me about that you've done outside of wrestling to help out in your community?
Oh, we used to do a lot of golf events. Before I had all the back surgeries, I was a pretty decent golfer. And banquets, we'd head up banquets, fundraisers for children's hospitals. Oh my God, we did so many of them, I can't even remember all of them. All the different organizations. Wrestling was so hot that we usually have myself and maybe 3 or 4 other wrestlers there for the events, going over to the children's hospital, spending time with the kids, Ronald McDonald House. We've done, there aren't too many that we missed.
Was
But
there like,
what? That's all part of being a recognizable athlete. Some the guys that do that really do well in the sport and represent the sport. There's other guys that don't want to take the time to do that. And I don't have time for people like that. And there was a lot of them in our industry that didn't. But today, and I mean, the ones that Verne trained, we knew the deal. When we were called, we better be there and treat the people right and spend time with them. I know Jim and I went up, one little guy had cancer, and we went up and saw him, brought him some red hats and stuff, and brought him the belts and took pictures with him. And we walked out of there, and he was just smiling and so full of energy. Before we got home, we got a call. He had passed away about 15 minutes after we left. And man, did that one hit home. I still get choked up talking about it. But those are the things you do. It's just it's part of who you are and what you represent. And as a professional, you really need to take the time for the people that support you. And that's the way we were taught by Verne and everybody that came out of his camp. We put in the time, but it wasn't like a job for us. We wanted to do it. I mean, these are the people that support us. Without them, we're nothing, you know. And that little guy was bigger than life.
very heart
Ooh,
wrenching?
that's a tough one to even talk about today.
Yeah. Well, what is it about giving back to you that gives you joy, gives you the most joy?
Oh man, when you just see their faces. I mean, this little guy, like his parents said, man, we never see him with so much energy. The doctors and nurses there said, oh my God. But it was like that all the time. When you go in and you see him light up, uh, it's a great feeling. Sometime you've been on the road and you're tired and you go, oh God, I have to go do this. And then you know you have to, and you go, and then you see how much you mean and how much enjoyment and how much light you put on for them. That God, it's really moving.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I just want to say thank you again for coming on to Wrestling with Heart. It means a lot to me and to my listeners and viewers that are watching this on YouTube. Where can people find more about you on social media?
They can't. I hide out. I'm on Instagram. In fact, I take my mother had put together these scrapbooks starting in 1948, and I try to put on at least 3 articles a day on Instagram. And it's Gagne / Greg, I think is what it is on Instagram, or Gagne.Greg. But if they go to that, people just get enthralled with that old stuff.
That's good.
I'm putting this stuff up there. I try to do it every day, but I've been a little lax the last 3 days because I've been running hard. But that's where they can find me, on Instagram.
Well, thank you again, Greg, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Oh, the other thing is a podcast. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
God, we got a podcast. Straight Talk with the Boss, Magnum, TA, and Greg Gagne. It's on the 4 Horsemen Network.
Okay.
Don't miss that. And then Powertown Wrestling. It's called Powertown, where wrestling lives on, and we have action figures. Our first 6 figures were Verne Gagne, Lou Thez, King Kong Brody, Stan Hansen, Kerry Von Erich, and Magnum TA. And they were our ultras, and we're sold out of them. But if you go to Powertown and look at the next series that's coming out, we have a Remco line that came out, did very well with it. And we're kind of we got the recognition now that we've got the best action figures on the market. So go to powertownwrestling.com, look it up, and keep an eye out. We got some new figures coming out soon, and we do everything by pre-sale.
All right. Thanks again, Greg, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Well, thanks for letting me plug all that. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care.
You did a great job. I'm proud of you.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Right. You too. Thank you.
This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.